之外的责任呢？哦，大家都要变到前面去。
Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share my views with my colleagues. And the title given by the organizer, I think Mr. Habashi, is more entitled to talk about the implications for African change in the African political situation. So my title is African Development and the China-African Relations. This is a bronze artwork in Benin City, Nigeria. It's very beautiful. This is another one. Why I show this? Both are now exhibited in British Museum in 1897. In order to control the trade, Britain smashed the Benin City, Benin Kingdom, and took 2,500 pieces of precious bronze sculptures. And the same thing occurred in China. This is a summer palace in China. That's before the robbery. Oh, sorry. This is summer palace after destruction. The same thing, but a bit earlier. In 1860, British and French, in order to control China's market, can destroy the summer palace. But this is a kind of dramatic similarity. That was what the colonialism did in China and Africa. It shows both have the great civilizations, as both suffered from colonialism, spelling, and also both have the history of humiliation. So I'm going to talk very quickly about these topics: great achievements, various difficulties, China-African cooperation, great opportunity, and a great challenge. As early as 1949, a Ghanaian doctor was nominated for Nobel Prize. Of course, he didn't get another British got the prize, but he was nominated. He made this statement, shows that West Africa had a great civilization. And when we talk about Africa, usually with a pessimistic viewpoint, but actually from the long perspective, from historical perspective, we can see it has achieved a great deal. Integration. Actually, African Union, although yes, it has a lot of shortcomings, but it's the only union which gave one voice in some important international affairs, not European Union, not ASEAN, and not NAFTA, no other continent organizations have reached that extent. And the human rights issue as well. And we talked about human rights not in an abstract sense. We have to look at the ethnic rights, women's rights, and from my understanding, for Italy, Belgium, those countries, the right to vote for women only got, I think, in the late 40s. But for Africa, the women's rights to vote, of course, as soon as the independent movement, and also the women offered their, actually from the 60s, the ministers and the UN chair and the Nobel Prize winner, and now they have the women prime minister and women president. And border wars is another issue. In Europe, we know that the modern history created a lot of communism, but a lot of disaster as well. War, and the border war is one of the significant phenomena. And for Africa, 44 border lines were drafted according to the longitude and the latitude. Okay, and 27 was done by the straight line or geographic lines. Very little is done by the natural river and the mountains. What does that indicate? It means all those border lines was done in Berlin, in Paris, in London. So actually, from this fact, Africa should have a lot of border wars, but it is not. Since 1963, the first generation of African leaders realized this danger and offered the common view. We have to respect the present border. And nation building, this is a totally Western phenomenon. But today we have our African friends from Zimbabwe, which have actually the Shona and the Bene and other ethnic group, and Mali, and also South Africa have 11 official languages. But still they recognize themselves as Zimbabwean, South African, and Malian. For other countries, nation building is a very long process. After more than 80 years of independence, United States still fought a war and keep the nation unified at a sacrifice of 620,000 soldiers' deaths. That's a civil war. So nation building is not an easy thing. So that's a great achievement. And various difficulties, of course. We have governance and administration issue, and food security and environment issue, population and health, non-government organization, and external interference in various aspects. And I won't elaborate this. And China and African cooperation. We have our own concept. First is promising continent, not hopeless. Africa. In 2000, one article was published in Economist entitled Hopeless Africa. But the same year, China, Africa held the first forum on China-African cooperation. And human resources, rich human natural resources, cultural heritage. Why should it be poor hopeless. One thing, the current world, only one person. That's a friendly reminder. And one person which holds the respect, both south and north, from both east and west. That's an African, Nelson Mandela. No other, I cannot find another person. Partners, not donor recipients. That's another concept for China-African relations. Because we use partners because we think donor-recipient term already indicate the unequal positions. One is, superior, another inferior. One the rich, poor, and arrogant, subordinate. It's unequal position. And also principles: equality and mutual respect, bilateralism, and co-development. No political strings attached, and non-interference of domestic affairs, and stress on the capability of self-reliance. Great opportunities. Of course, this last year report was issued. It's Alliance on the Move, which indicates some opportunities for Africa. And African tomorrow. That's also, but of course, this is all the GDP centered, right? And that's and a great challenge. I don't have the time to tell the story, I guess. But anyway, from China's experience of development, I think 4 points we should emphasize here. The political leadership, that's very important, which means you have your own agenda of development, and you concentrate on your country's both the commonest interests and social stability, and emphasis on agriculture and initiative and aid. So, because according to classic political science theory, countries like China should not be, fragile, inherently fragile. It seems so far so good. Social stability, we have that for a lot of African countries and Asian countries. So we realize that once there is a chaotic situation or riots or whatever, the whole achievement would be destroyed. And so that is something we also have to pay attention to. And emphasis on agriculture, and Professor Wen mentioned this, and as early as 1982, from that year, the first document every year is on agriculture issued by the Chinese government, either on rural prices or irrigation or rural farmers or rural migrants or agricultural machinery, all these things. And the initiative and aid, this is another issue. For developing countries, we should always put our stand first on self-reliance. If you depend on the foreign aid, then, sorry, that also comes in my time. That's right. I'm finishing. But anyway, yeah, we also one story. The Deng Xiaoping met the president of World Bank at the early years of reform, and he said, "We welcome the World Bank to invest in China to provide money support. If you support us, we can develop faster. If you don't, we will still develop, maybe at a lower speed." So the emphasis is on self-reliance, I think, and that is a very critical point. And we know that a lot of African countries develop on I think the Madagascar, 80% of the budget is aid, and for other countries, sometimes 70%. That's very high, and a great challenge. There are good leadership, determination of development, strategy planning, and the national efforts. And there are also challenges. And I think this one is very important. And now the anti-terrorism become a very big subject in African continent. But I don't think African countries should let that to degrade our focus on development. And that's a very important issue. And also the foreign models. Don't copy China's model, don't copy American model, British or French models. Develop your own style, your own model, but learn from others. And of course, there are also some issues in China-African relations. I mentioned here employment and labor condition, market, environmental issue, and goods quality, etc. And we can discuss that in a later discussion. And China's role, strategic investment, better than aid, and assistance in various fields, and experience sharing. So that's my conclusion. It's good reservoir human resources and natural resources with hard working and with an applicable development strategy with adequate international support. Africa definitely has a bright future. Thank you.
谢谢李教授。我很高兴介绍一个老朋友，美国的菲尔定研究院的 Margo Okazawa-Rey 教授。他的题目就是军国主义冲突及妇女的行动。Lili萨拉利安女的挑战与前进。
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to all the organizers. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you to my tour group, from whom I've gotten so much energy and ideas this week. And a particular thanks to our interpreters in the booth. I think they perform a supremely political act, because without them, there's no way that we could be having these presentations and conversations. And in some ways, they're like the farmers who we don't think about in the cities as we're eating. So thank you very much. I want to talk today about Professor Lee's presentation was an excellent kind of a background for me to talk about some of the work we've been doing in related to issues of women, militarism, armed conflict in four, in this case, 3 West African countries. And I want to let you know that this work was developed with Professor Amina Mama at UC Davis, formerly African Gender Institute at University of Cape Town, and our colleagues in Nigeria, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Ghana. So I'm having them in my mind and as I go through this. Let's see, what I want to, or what we're arguing in our work is that post-colonial conflicts actually epitomize some of the worst excesses of militarism in the era of neoliberal globalization, and the economic, organizational, and ideological features of militarism undermine the prospects for democratization, social justice, and genuine security, especially for women in post-war and militarized societies. And this kind of mitigates a little bit some of the points that Professor Lee made earlier. The purpose of my presentation is to provide a feminist perspective on militarism, drawing examples from Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Liberian civil wars to examine women's participation in conflict, their survival and livelihood strategies, and their activism. I offer concepts of a post-colonial war rather than the new wars that Mary Kaldor suggests, or the border wars that Professor Lee introduced. And the war economy as entry points into this discussion. And by the way, all my citations and footnotes are in the paper that's on the website, so I'm not going to talk about all that, save time. Okay. I also want to highlight the potential of transnational feminist theorizing and activism for strengthening intellectual and political solidarities. And finally, I'll argue that the globalized military security system can be our common context for struggle as contemporary feminist and pro-feminist activist scholars. So just quickly, definition of militarism and militarization. You can read a lot of these words yourself, but it's basically a contradictory and tense social process in which civil society organizes itself for production of violence, both state violence and non-state violence. It's simultaneously a discursive process, and militarization, the process is intimately connected to the less visible deformation of human potentials into hierarchies of ethnicity, class, gender, and sexuality, and to the shaping of national history in ways that glorify and legitimate military action. The worldwide spending is over $2 billion, $1 billion spent by the US, and this is per day. Imagine how that money could be spent. When we went on our Southwest China tour, we were told that, and this was in the order I heard it, that military, industry, and agriculture were the developmental priorities in China. The feminist conceptualizations of militarism are generally broader than those prevailing within the field of conflict and security studies. We seek to address militarism as a gendered and gendering phenomenon, and to encourage and to engage critically its more enduring cultural, ideological, political, and economic aspects. So one important concept that we have tried to develop is the idea of post-colonial wars. Sorry. So unlike the conventional nation-state wars, These post-colonial wars are decentralized. They operate in transnational network of state and non-state actors and take various forms as are delineated here. And there's a connection between the various militia groups and so forth with the transnational corporations. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. And this is particularly true where the authority of the state has been weakened and the financing of war has been dispersed. War economy, delineated as having three segments. One is the coping economy, which is the most obviously feminized. It's basically the ways in which women sustain their families during wartime or armed conflict. A combat economy, which is specific to preparation and execution of war. It's run by combatants. It's male-dominated fraternity networked locally and transnationally. And then the criminal economy. They're really profit-seeking entrepreneurs. They take full advantage of economic deregulations. They are traffickers of people and goods, including sex traffickers, money launderers, and drug dealers. What I also want to highlight is the continuities between the colonial and contemporary militarism in Africa. And we talk about the following: the high civilian casualties and extensive destruction and seizure of property, both reminiscent of colonial punitive expeditions. Misogynistic, militarized sexualities enacted through sexual violence, coercion, and abuse with enduring effects. Local cultures and value systems replaced with the culture of violence that relies on gendered and ethnicized violence against dehumanized others. Captives are often subject to torture and mutilation, coerced into joining the perpetuation of violence and humiliation against others, often their own people. And the orchestration of collaboration was a feature in the colonial context that I'll be discussing below. The colonial capitalist economy of loot and plunder has evolved into equally ruthless quests for oil, diamonds, rubber, and other natural resources. The externalized nature of corporate interests is given visual form in the brightly lit, high-security compounds, complete with exclusive facilities for large foreign staff, bearing a strong resemblance to state military bases. And you can see that especially when you go to a place like the Niger Delta. And establishment of a parallel criminal economy, which I just mentioned. So I want to just present some